Welcome back to another episode of Common Language, where we break down today's complex policy issues into easy to understand ideas, helping curious minds stay informed, empowered, and engaged.
We will unpack three of the biggest headlines, including Dr. Fauci's congressional hearing, primary results in Michigan, and Trump's latest attack on birthright citizenship, breaking down why these stories matter for you and what they reflect about our democracy, including the continued fallout of COVID politics, the growing rise of anti establishment Democratic candidates, and executive power. So, Mac, kick us off with Dr. Fauci.
Yes, this headline has been making the rounds. Although it is 2026, there are continued politics at play as it relates to COVID and the leadership of our government during the pandemic. Specifically, this past week, the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee held a hearing with Dr. Fauci and wound up voting along party lines to hold the former National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases director in contempt of Congress after he repeatedly invoked his Fifth Amendment right during testimony related to the federal government's COVID-19 response. So essentially, what happens when the Senate votes and finds them in contempt, then they bring it to the full Senate to have a vote. And then after that, if it passes in the full Senate, it would go to the Department of Justice. However, in this case, Senator Rand Paul is saying he will bypass a full Senate vote where they would be unlikely to receive the two-thirds majority vote needed and instead directly refer the matter to the Department of Justice. This is, as I said, not the usual course of action, and so it's expected to face a lot of legal scrutiny. Republicans are saying that this measure is necessary to advance accountability for pandemic era decision making. On the other hand, Democrats are saying that this is an effort that is politically motivated and designed to revisit long standing disputes over COVID 19 policies. If Fauci is ultimately convicted, he could face fines of up to $100,000 and possibly prison time, which is crazy. Okay, so what do you make of this hearing? Dr. Fauci invoking his Fifth Amendment rights, the fallout from COVID that we are still in the midst of.
So, first of all, I just want to go back to the fact that you said we're in 2026 at this point. To be more clear, today is August 7th, 2026, and I'm just a little unclear why we are still revisiting this COVID situation as a priority when I think there are more pressing priorities at the moment, such as Epstein, Trump's closed Capital One accounts and his money laundering. It just goes and goes. And there's so many active things that happened just this year that I would love to investigate that might be a bit more pertinent. So I'm quite confused as to why we are sitting here wasting resources talking about this. I also think that it just really begs the question of what is the point of a pardon? If we start challenging every pardon that's issued, what precedent are we setting? I'm concerned about the precedent that it would set as well for anybody else that Trump decides to pardon, and how we would be able to or not pursue legal action against them too. So I think there's so many things here that pique my interest, but it's more about the general landscape of things than actually Dr. Fauci and the fact that I think he's deserving of any of this treatment, because ultimately the COVID-19 pandemic was a completely unprecedented event. I think that there were so many mistakes made, but it also wasn't like we had anything to go on. So how are you going to hold Dr. Fauci accountable for such an event? I just don't know how anybody could be held responsible unless you were like someone who caused COVID specifically, which is, or if it was some type of scam and scheme. That makes perfect sense, but it just feels like we're really going tit for tat here on a situation that should be closed, done with, and we have way bigger fish to fry here.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think that it It's coming across they are looking for someone to blame or point the finger at or be the villain in this whole COVID matter. Here's what I will say. I am always thinking, and I actually got this TikTok come up on my page the other day that's like thinking about the parallel universe that exists in my life had it not been for COVID-19 and the pandemic. And that made me think about the fact that COVID had such a big impact on our country, on the course of many people's lives that will never be the same. And I think it is important to talk about the impacts that we're still feeling, but grilling Dr. Fauci and putting him in this position, taking up time and resources so that they have a singular character to put all of the blame on those impacts on is not worthwhile for members of Congress to be putting their energy into. And all this legal stuff, the pardoning and the Fifth Amendment and blah, 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 just complicates the matter. But the bottom line here, and Fauci said it himself, they're really hung up on him. I don't think it will happen. But essentially, now the ball is in DOJ's court, right? It's up to them now to take this further if they want to. I don't think that they will, but Case, I'm curious to know if you think otherwise.
No, I don't think otherwise, and I do wanna say one thing too. I don't want to, in any way, shape, or form, belittle COVID. It was a horrible time. For those people who lost family members and loved ones, like, it's very triggering, and I can understand why people would want answers. So let me say that first and foremost. I just don't think that this is the person or vessel or the way in which we go about finding justice. I think
Yeah.
we can easily point fingers at the Trump administration who was in charge and denied COVID for a long time. So that's really where I feel more blame should be placed. You can't blame the person who was trying to help, which is exactly what this is. Anybody could have made mistakes in that situation. We had never been through anything like that before, for sure. And like I mentioned, but it makes me irritated that Dr. Fauci is now all of a sudden politicized, that you
Yeah.
have a nitwit like Aaron Rodgers basically belittling him for pleading the fifth when he did more for this country for that pandemic and trying to save people's lives than anybody. And that was his purest intention, and that's my belief. But the Biden administration had to come in and actually start addressing the virus, spreading information about what people should be doing, and that was no easy task. I just don't appreciate that they're holding him to the fire on this, but I also think that any reasonable person is
Yeah.
looking at this and saying, "What a joke."
Yeah. Very much, yeah, like waste of time. And I do think that what is especially irritating about it is that it gives breathing room for conspiracy theories and to discredit actual doctors who have studied this and are experts on the matter, like a Dr. Fauci. And it would be one thing if, yes, there was some clear indication that there was malpractice, right? Doctors can be sued for malpractice. That is a thing. And that's why we have these accountability measures, but that just was not the case here. I think any reasonable person can say the government was trying their best to combat an unprecedented global pandemic that was killing thousands of people. So, why don't we move on and actually try to make sure that our health systems and our doctors are fully equipped with the research, science, and resources that they need to combat things like the poop virus that's going around now that can't be contained. Like, where are our answers there? That's actually
Yeah, let's talk about the measles outbreak that's been the worst our country has seen in decades, and let's focus on those things that are actually pressing matters. And also, I always say it's a reality show in the White House right now, and this is a perfect example because right now this is just a distraction.
agreed.
All right, let's talk about this Michigan primary, why don't we? Because it was quite eventful week. when we were talking about the lead up to the midterms. So, Michigan's Democratic primary for the open U.S. Senate seat marked one of the most significant progressive victories of the 2026 election cycle thus far. Candidate Abdul El-Sayed, who was backed by progressive leaders such as Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, prevailed over the establishment backed Haley Stevens despite being heavily outspent, underscoring the continued strength of economic populist and anti establishment messaging within the Democratic Party. His victory sets up a closely watched general election against Republican Mike Rogers in one of the nation's key battleground states and is likely to serve as an early test of whether progressive candidates can successfully compete in swing state general elections while shaping the Democratic Party's strategy. So, this was a really interesting race. I think Bernie Sanders called it the most significant race of, I don't know if he said our generation or what, but he was like really going 10 toes down on this one. I have a lot of thoughts, but Mac, please take it away.
Yes, this was certainly an interesting race to watch because we've seen this film before and we keep getting kind of the same results. I think the question was, though, before, like, we saw a lot of these same results in New York, and people were questioning whether that was a bubble or like specific to New York
Yeah.
and the uniqueness of a city like New York that is one of a kind. And could that be replicated throughout? Would candidates similar to a Zoran and the members we saw win in the congressional primaries be replicated outside of New York? And this is showing us, yes, I think we saw that with Plattner. Scandal aside, we're seeing that with Plattner in Maine. Now we're seeing this with El-Sayed in Michigan. And I think outside of the anti-establishment Democratic Socialist rise divide versus the more like center is also, to me, interesting, the millennial Gen Z divide, because a lot of people were saying that Haley Stevens was giving cringe millennial in a lot of her like speeches and just like her mannerisms and her overall demeanor was just very like cringe millennial.
There's
And
a
then you
lot of
had
millennial rhetoric out there. They love to make fun of us.
I know. And it's like, and I get it. And listen, we are on somewhat the younger end of the millennial generation. And so I see both sides here. And I am able to point out, like, yeah, that's a little cringe. She's being a little too millennial. Whereas El Said was on TikTok doing all these like a funny kind of bits and skits and trending sounds and audio. And I think Van Jones, in commentary on the results of this election, he said something that rang very true, which is the revolution will not be televised. It will be TikToked and podcasted and viral. And I think that is so true. Like the mediums of campaign and press are changing, and the candidates like us that are able to leverage that and be with the times are going to be successful. What do you think?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I also think that the younger you are, the more malleable you are with your beliefs, with your views. And we're seeing that shift because it is the younger generations that are turning out to vote and that are the participation. TikTok isn't reaching the boomers. They're
Yeah.
not the ones changing the needle right now. So
Yeah.
it's the younger generation that is on TikTok, that is watching their live streamers on YouTube, that's where the people are.
Yeah.
So if you want to have an influential campaign at this point, and if you want to really find people who are open and willing to listen to you, that is where you need to go. And then we need to double down on the fact that these younger generations are feeling excluded and poor and not set up for success. So it's the perfect cocktail for more progressive candidates to be able to catch ground and get some traction. So I think going back to what you said, if you had asked me what I would have predicted for this primary, I would have said, I don't know. I think that for sure what happened in New York definitely felt like a bubble. Whether or not it could have been replicated, I really wasn't sure because it's different. But I think that what we're seeing consistently is that number one, Israel stands to be the issue that especially young people are really caring about. The fact is, Stevens received, I think they said between at
It's like
minimum
30
million.
million.
Yeah, and they lost. I think we're there's just this combination that's working right now.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about a comms strategy, it's get on TikTok, get on pod. He was hanging out with Hassan Piker. He was going all in. It was a little crazy.
I
So
know.
again, a week ago, I would have said, I don't know. It'll be really interesting, but I really didn't know if he was going to win.
Yeah, no, it was crazy, and, like, truly, one of the clips I saw of Haley Stevens talking, I was like, "Who let this go on?" It was scary. I didn't know she was, like, acting or being herself, but it was just really weird. She was basically poking fun at coastal elites and, what conservatives like, the snowflakes, right? The terms and the concepts that are mocked and made fun of about or stereotyped, I guess, about the far left. And it's just not landing. It's not landing. And I also agree that the Israel and the AIPAC of it all, it is clear as day at this point. And if the Democrats do not adjust and make some different decisions moving forward with AIPAC and their stance on Israel, then I don't know what to tell you because the proof is in the pudding.
The proof is in the pudding. The time is over.
Yeah. We'll have these candidates that the primaries produce. And I do think we are really entering this new era of politics, particularly within the Democratic Party and the different fractions. But that will really be the test because, to your point, I think primaries, you turn out the people that are within the party that are seeking change internally, and it drives momentum behind the non-establishment candidates. But then it's okay, can they really contend when it's the general election and we have Republicans, independents, moderates, and Democrats voting? So I definitely want to keep an eye on all of this because I will be curious to see what the polling looks like now that we have some of these primary candidates, these non-establishment primary candidates preparing for November.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. With that said, let's move on to our next item. And we have covered over the course of this administration as it is a major priority for President Trump, and that is birthright citizenship and his latest attacks on trying to end birthright citizenship in the United States. So this week, literally, I think yesterday, Trump signed two new executive orders aimed at restricting birthright citizenship. And this is following the Supreme Court rejecting his earlier attempts to end birthright citizenship and reaffirming the longstanding interpretation of the 14th Amendment, which guarantees citizenship to nearly all individuals born on U.S. soil. These new executive orders focus in part on limiting what is being called birth tourism and directing federal agencies to pursue additional restrictions on citizenship eligibility. Specifically, this is for diplomats and foreign officers who have children in the States. And civil rights organizations, including the ACLU, have immediately announced plans to challenge the orders, arguing that they conflict with the latest SCOTUS decision, as well as precedents such as the U.S. versus Wong Kim Ark decision. The orders once again are signaling that Trump will not back down on this issue. He will not take the no, and he will continue to pursue this in any channel and avenues he sees fit. So, once again, deja vu. Here we are again, Casey. What do you make of these latest efforts from Trump to end birthright citizenship in this country, and why is this issue so important to him?
Yeah, it's important to him because he's racist and he's a bigot. So that's
I'm
he's
screaming.
continuing to pursue this. This has been shut down by the Supreme Court. The 14th Amendment exists for a reason. I don't think that these efforts will be successful, but I think he just feels the need to try to exert his power in this way because he is so deeply racist and he wants white supremacy to be the law of the land in the United States. And he's not able to say it in those layman's terms, but this is what this is doing. And birth tourism, I just think it's pretty clear that based on the decisions of the Trump administration to fund ICE so heavily and have ICE be so aggressive, who in their right mind wants to come here? Like, this is not a problem.
Yeah. I'm very intrigued by the whole birth tourism conversation and the data and evidence that is there to support it. And based on my research and findings, essentially, the numbers that we do have suggest that it's very minimal. When Trump was talking about this, they asked him, do you have a number of how many birth tourism babies are delivered in the US? And of course, Trump, being the hyperbolic person that he is, was like, oh, it's in the hundreds of thousands.
My research
Yeah.
said 10,000. What did yours say?
And it's basically it's all 3% of birth. It does happen, but it's a very small number. And again, it's something that's very complicated because it's hard to determine like how many people are actively deceiving officials when they come into this country, hiding their pregnancy, hiding their intentions to deliver, versus how many people are coming here pregnant but seeking asylum and refuge under laws that do give them access to coming into this country. And so it gets really complicated. And I do think bottom line here is that this administration is exaggerating the numbers and how much of a phenomenon this is in this country. And imagine how much of a dire situation you would have to be to travel to another country at 9 months pregnant to give birth to a child. It would have to be really dire. So I don't think people are like all willy-nilly, like trying to come here to give birth, like to in the ways that this administration is portraying it. I think the other thing that's also really scary with these executive orders are them trying to limit birthright citizenship for territories and places off the mainland where it's like, okay, now again, you're just trying to rewrite laws and precedent that we have. And so that speaks to your point too. It's who does this administration want to be citizens is not. And I think that these executive orders make it very clear who they think are entitled to citizenship and the benefits that come with them in this country and who they don't.
I'm very much looking forward to this being struck down as well. So that is all we have for you this week. Thank you guys so much for listening, as always. And we want to make sure to remind everyone to please leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts, subscribe to our socials, and keep staying curious, keep staying engaged, keep staying connected. We will see you next time. Bye.